The BTK killer, a nickname that stands for bind, torture, kill, is the alias of Dennis Rader, an American serial killer who terrorized Kansas for decades before his capture in 2005. Rader's reign of terror began in 1974 and continued until 1991, although he taunted the police and the public with letters in between his killings. His crimes, meticulous and sadistic in nature, baffled authorities for years, making his eventual arrest all the more chilling. Dennis Rader was born on March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas, to a working-class family. As a young man, he joined the U.S. Air Force, which took him away from Kansas for a few years. He eventually returned and married Paula Dietz, a woman who was unaware of his dark tendencies. The couple had 2 children, and Rader seemed to live an ordinary life, working as a compliance officer for the Park City, Kansas city government. He was even an active member of his church, serving as the president of the congregation. To the outside world, Rader appeared to be a law-abiding citizen, a father, and a husband. But Rader harbored a twisted desire to kill, a compulsion he could not control. His first known murder occurred in 1974, when he brutally murdered the Otero family, Joseph, Julie, and their 2 children, Josie and Joseph Jr. Rader, methodically and sadistically bound, tortured, and killed them in their home. Afterward, he took the time to arrange the bodies in a manner that disturbed investigators. He took photographs of his victims and left the scene, but not before leaving a chilling clue, a note detailing the murder, which he sent to local news outlets. This was just the beginning. Over the next several years, Rader continued his reign of terror, carefully selecting victims and methodically carrying out his killings. His next victim was Catherine Bright in 1977. Rader shot Catherine and nearly killed her brother, Kevin Bright, who survived the attack and later became a key witness in the investigation. Despite this near miss, Rader remained undetected. Rader's crimes became more brazen as the years went on. He would send taunting letters to the police and media, detailing the specifics of his killings. His letters were laced with arrogance, as he described the thrill he experienced while committing his crimes. He even included clues about his identity, but for years, no one could connect them to him. These letters were signed with the BTK moniker, a name that became infamous as the killer's presence loomed over the city. After his 4th murder in 1985, Rader's killing spree came to an unexpected halt. He disappeared from the radar, leaving authorities baffled and fearful that he would strike again. The hiatus lasted for over a decade, and during that time, Rader went on with his life, living in the same community, raising his family, and holding a steady job. He resumed his role in his church and even began working in a local church group that worked with young people. All the while, he remained the perfect picture of normalcy. However, in the early 2000s, Rader began to resurface. He sent more letters to the police, the media, and even to a local newspaper, claiming responsibility for several murders that had gone unsolved. In one of his letters, Rader made a cryptic reference to a new project, which turned out to be his plan to make himself famous once again. This time, however, he made a crucial mistake. He sent a floppy disk to the police with instructions that it would contain a clue to his identity. Authorities, with the help of technology, were able to trace the disk back to Rader, whose name had been associated with the BTK killings for decades. In February 2005, after DNA evidence and the floppy disk led them to him, Rader was arrested. The revelation that the BTK killer had been living among them all this time shocked the world. Rader's ordinary life had concealed his monstrous secret for over 3 decades. In interviews after his arrest, Rader admitted to the murders, explaining the reasons behind his desire to kill. He expressed satisfaction in the control he had over his victims and the fear he instilled in them. Rader was convicted of 10 murders, and in 2005, he was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. His capture ended one of the most chilling and prolonged serial killer cases in U.S. history. Today, Dennis Rader remains incarcerated, and the legacy of the BTK killer continues to haunt the city of Wichita, Kansas, where his crimes took place. His ability to hide in plain sight for so long serves as a grim reminder of how a seemingly ordinary life can mask the darkest of secrets. After Dennis Rader's arrest in 2005, the full extent of his depravity and the chilling details of his crimes began to emerge during his trial and in the investigation that followed. Rader's ability to blend into society was terrifying, as he had lived among his victims, even attending their funerals and church services, all while maintaining the persona of a devout family man. His capture sent shockwaves through the community, as many never suspected the mild-mannered man they knew could be the infamous BTK killer. During his trial, Rader's calm and detached demeanor in the courtroom further reinforced the horror of his actions. He appeared without emotion as he admitted to all 10 murders. The media coverage was intense, and Rader became the focus of public fascination and fear as people tried to understand how someone so seemingly normal could harbor such dark impulses. At his sentencing, Rader showed no remorse, offering a cold and methodical account of his murders in a way that suggested he took pride in his actions. His confession detailed the planning and execution of his killings, revealing just how meticulous and organized he was. Rader explained how he stalked his victims, learning their routines and preparing for the perfect moment to strike. He confessed to the sexual gratification he derived from the killings, and how he relished the control and fear he instilled in his victims. He also described how he took trophies from the crime scenes, including personal items belonging to his victims, which he kept as mementos. In the aftermath of Rader's arrest, many wondered how he had managed to evade capture for so long. For years, the investigation was bogged down by a lack of forensic evidence and the killer's careful nature. Rader was smart enough to avoid leaving physical evidence at the scenes, and his use of letters to taunt the police only served to confuse them further. He was able to manipulate the investigation and keep authorities off his trail, all while living a normal life. His letters to the media became increasingly erratic, and in some, he expressed frustration at the fact that police had not been able to catch him. Rader's decision to resurface in 2004 after such a long hiatus was a critical turning point in his capture. He had become emboldened by the years of evading capture, and likely believed he could continue to outsmart law enforcement. But his mistake in sending the floppy disk to the police proved to be his undoing. When the police recovered the disk, they were able to trace it back to him. They discovered that Rader had used a computer linked to his church, which allowed investigators to connect him directly to the BTK killer persona. The seemingly innocuous disk led to his arrest, showing just how much his arrogance had clouded his judgment. Rader's capture brought a sense of closure to the families of his victims, but also raised many unsettling questions about the nature of his personality and his life before and after the murders. How could a man who appeared so ordinary carry out such horrific acts? How had his family, his friends, and his community never noticed the warning signs? These questions are part of the disturbing reality of serial killers. They often go unnoticed for years, even decades, blending in with society while hiding a monstrous secret. In prison, Rader has given several interviews, often speaking with a cold detachment that he exhibited during his trial. He has expressed no remorse for his actions, and his accounts of the killings are chilling in their detail. He described the thrill of each murder as if he were discussing a routine activity, rather than the brutal destruction of human life. His willingness to relive his crimes in such a matter-of-fact way only deepens the horror of his character. Rader's family, too, has been left to deal with the aftermath of his crimes. His wife, Paula Dietz, filed for divorce shortly after his arrest, and his children have had to cope with the realization that their father was responsible for the deaths of 10 people. They were blindsided by the discovery, as Rader had carefully concealed his identity and kept his murderous desires hidden from those closest to him. Over time, Rader's case became an example of the complexities and challenges in the investigation of serial murders. The BTK killer case was one of the longest unsolved serial killer cases in American history, and his eventual capture highlighted the importance of new forensic technologies, such as DNA testing and digital evidence, in solving crimes. Rader's arrest also underscored the psychological profile of serial killers, particularly those who can maintain a facade of normalcy, making them difficult to detect. Today, Dennis Rader remains incarcerated at the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas, where he is serving 10 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. His case has continued to be studied by criminologists, psychologists, and law enforcement agencies, as it offers insight into the mind of a serial killer and the investigative process behind solving such complex crimes. The legacy of the BTK killer is one of fear, confusion, and tragedy. For the people of Wichita, Kansas, the terror that Rader instilled in their community has never fully faded, even though the killer is behind bars. The Otero family, the Bright family, and the families of Rader's other victims will never have closure, as no explanation can truly make sense of the horrific acts that were carried out by a man who appeared to be just like everyone else. The chilling reality that Dennis Rader was able to lead such a dual life, part of community and a family, yet a cold-blooded killer, serves as a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk within even the most ordinary individuals. In the years following Dennis Rader's conviction, his case continued to captivate public interest, particularly because of the gruesome nature of his crimes and the shocking revelation that he had been living an outwardly normal life for so long while secretly harboring a dark, murderous compulsion. The psychological complexity of Rader's actions and his ability to maintain a facade of respectability made him a subject of fascination for criminal psychologists, criminologists, and the public at large. Rader's ability to manipulate his environment was one of the key aspects of his character. He not only evaded capture for decades, but also enjoyed the psychological game he played with law enforcement. His letters, often cryptic and taunting, were designed to frustrate investigators. They were a means for him to assert control over the situation, maintaining the upper hand in his twisted relationship with the police and media. Rader's decision to resurface after a long period of silence in the early 2000s was a critical moment in his eventual capture, but was also indicative of his need for recognition and validation. He wanted to continue the cat-and-mouse game with authorities and bask in the notoriety that had been denied to him for so many years. His letters included detailed descriptions of his murders, clues about his identity, and bizarre demands. He would often suggest that the media and police should take him more seriously, which reinforced his need to feel powerful and acknowledged. In one particularly disturbing letter, he even indicated that he had plans to kill again and would continue until the authorities were able to figure out his true identity. However, his arrogance in the late 2000s ultimately led to his downfall. When he sent the floppy disk containing information that could trace him, he underestimated the technological advances that were available to law enforcement, which were able to link him to the BTK persona and lead to his arrest. After his arrest, Dennis Rader continued to demonstrate his narcissistic and manipulative behavior, offering chillingly detailed accounts of his murders in interviews with law enforcement. His willingness to talk about the killings with no apparent remorse shocked many, as Rader described how he stalked his victims and enjoyed the power and control he had over their lives. For Rader, the murders were a way to assert dominance and satisfy his perverse desires, and he would often describe the emotional satisfaction he felt after taking a life. His recounting of the murders was often so detailed that it seemed almost clinical, revealing the lack of any genuine empathy or remorse. Rader's trial was an eerie spectacle, as the details of his crimes came to light for the public. The courtroom was filled with survivors and the families of victims, all seeking justice for the lives Rader had taken. As a family man and a respected member of his community, Rader's arrest caused immense shock and disbelief. His wife, Paula Dietz, and children were left to cope with the overwhelming realization that the man they had known and trusted was the notorious BTK killer. In a painful twist, they too were victims of his double life, as they struggled to reconcile the man they knew with a man capable of such horrific acts. The impact on his children was profound. Rader's daughter, who was a teenager at the time of his arrest, spoke publicly about the emotional turmoil she experienced after learning about her father's crimes. She described how she had felt as though she had been living with a stranger for much of her life, and the betrayal she felt was compounded by the public attention surrounding the case. She expressed her disbelief at how her father had been able to maintain such a normal life while concealing his true identity as a killer. The psychological toll on Rader's family was immense, and it served as another tragic facet of his story. The community of Wichita, Kansas, was similarly shaken by Rader's arrest. For over 3 decades, the people of Wichita had lived in fear, knowing that a killer was lurking among them. Although Rader's name had become infamous, the idea that someone so ordinary could be responsible for such monstrous acts was something many struggled to come to terms with. The fear of the BTK killer haunted the city, and his eventual capture was both a relief and a horrifying revelation for the people who had lived in the shadow of his terror. In the years since his conviction, Rader has been the subject of numerous psychological evaluations, documentaries, and books. His case has become a classic example of how serial killers can often lead normal lives, blending in with society while committing horrific crimes. Rader's ability to conceal his dark impulses and maintain a family and career is a chilling reminder that not all serial killers fit the stereotypical image of a loner or an outcast. The case of the BTK killer is a stark example of how the most dangerous predators can sometimes hide in plain sight, making their eventual capture all the more terrifying. Rader's arrest also raised significant questions about the nature of justice and the effectiveness of law enforcement in solving cases involving serial killers. While the BTK case had long gone cold, the breakthrough came only through a combination of technological advancements, forensic evidence, and Rader's own carelessness. The use of DNA testing, as well as digital evidence from the floppy disk, was critical in identifying him as the killer. Law enforcement agencies have since used the lessons learned from the BTK investigation to improve their methods for solving cold cases, especially in relation to serial killers. Dennis Rader's conviction and life sentence in prison closed a chapter on one of the most haunting serial killer cases in U.S. history. While he will never be free again, the impact of his crimes continues to be felt by the victims' families, the city of Wichita, and everyone who followed the case. His ability to hide behind a mask of normalcy for so long serves as a haunting reminder that the line between good and evil is not always as clear as it seems, and that even the most ordinary-seeming individuals can harbor dark, murderous tendencies. The case of the BTK killer remains one of the most chilling and perplexing chapters in the study of criminal psychology and law enforcement. Rader's case also contributed to the evolution of law enforcement practices and forensic technologies. His capture marked a turning point in the way serial killers were apprehended, with advancements in digital forensics playing a pivotal role in his downfall. The floppy disk Rader sent in 2004, which ultimately led investigators to him, was a key piece of evidence. This incident underscored the growing importance of digital evidence and the use of technology in solving crimes, especially in cases that may otherwise have remained unsolved for decades. The digital age has since seen a rise in the use of genetic genealogy in solving cold cases, a method that has been used to crack other high-profile cases, including the Golden State Killer investigation. The BTK case also exemplifies how modern forensic techniques, such as DNA analysis and the ability to trace digital footprints, have transformed the investigative process. It is now far more difficult for perpetrators to cover their tracks as completely as Rader once did, thanks to advances in criminal science. Despite the sense of closure brought by his conviction, Rader's case continues to raise ethical and moral questions. His desire for fame, expressed in his letters and public confessions, spoke to his need for control, even after his capture. His lack of remorse, coupled with his willingness to discuss his crimes in chilling detail, emphasized the disturbingly sociopathic nature of his personality. Some psychologists believe that Rader derived immense pleasure not only from the killings themselves, but from the psychological torment he inflicted on the police, the media, and the families of his victims. His ability to manipulate those around him, including his own family, and to continue leading a double life, is a stark reminder of the complexity of human behavior and the disturbing capacity for evil that exists in some individuals. Rader's family, particularly his children, had continued to grapple with the horror of discovering their father's secret life. In the wake of his arrest, they faced the unbearable truth that the man they loved was capable of unimaginable violence. His children have remained largely out of the public eye since the trial, understandably seeking privacy as they deal with the long-lasting effects of having been related to a notorious serial killer. His wife, Paula Dietz, also struggled with the revelation, and their divorce shortly after his arrest was a necessary step for her to distance herself from the man she had been married to for decades. In addition to the emotional trauma for Rader's family, his crimes have left a lasting impact on the families of his victims. The surviving relatives of the Otero family, the Bright family, and the other victims have had to contend with the pain of losing loved ones in such horrific circumstances. Many of them have spoken publicly about their experiences, emphasizing the sense of grief and helplessness they felt as they watched the case go unsolved for so long. The emotional scars from such crimes are never fully healed, and the anguish of living with the knowledge that a loved one died at the hands of a serial killer is something that stays with them forever. The BTK case has also had a lasting influence on the city of Wichita, Kansas, and the broader community. For many years, the fear of the BTK killer was a part of everyday life. The residents of Wichita lived with a constant uncertainty of whether the killer would strike again, and this fear was compounded by the media coverage that kept the case in the public eye. Even after Rader's capture, the memories of those years of terror lingered. The city, once a quiet and peaceful community, became forever associated with the BTK killer and the nightmare that he unleashed. In terms of criminal psychology, Rader's case has become a textbook example of a methodical serial killer. Unlike killers who act impulsively or out of sudden fits of rage, Rader took his time to plan and execute each of his murders. He was patient, calculating, and deliberate. He took trophies, taunted the police, and appeared to revel in the fear he instilled. His crimes followed a pattern, yet he was able to stay elusive for so long because of his ability to hide in plain sight. His case has been used as an example in criminology courses to explore the behavior of serial killers, especially those who maintain a facade of normalcy while committing horrific acts. In the media, Rader's story has been widely covered, not just because of his gruesome crimes, but also because of the complexity of his personality and the chilling way he managed to keep his dual life a secret. Documentaries, books, and podcasts have delved into his life, seeking to understand the psychological profile of a man who could compartmentalize his personal life and his life as a killer so effectively. The chilling reality of Rader's personality, his lack of remorse, and his cold, calculated behavior continue to captivate those seeking to understand the minds of serial killers. Rader, now in prison, has largely remained out of the public eye, aside from occasional letters and interviews. He continues to serve his life sentence at the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas, where he is unlikely to ever gain parole. In his prison letters, Rader has at times expressed his boredom and dissatisfaction with incarceration, but he also seems to take pleasure in the attention his case continues to receive. He has occasionally been the subject of interviews, where he recounts his crimes with unsettling calm, maintaining the same sense of detachment and pride he displayed during his trial. Ultimately, the case of the BTK killer serves as a grim reminder of the horrors that can lurk behind the facade of normalcy. Dennis Rader's life story is an unsettling example of how a person can hide their true nature for years, even decades, while deceiving everyone around them. His eventual capture brought some closure, but the scars left by his actions on his victims, their families, and the community remain. The BTK case will undoubtedly continue to be studied by future generations, serving as both a cautionary tale and a dark reflection on the capabilities of human evil. As the years pass since Dennis Rader's conviction, his case remains one of the most chilling examples of a serial killer who blended into society while carrying out horrific crimes. The psychological impact of his actions on both the victims' families and the larger community continues to resonate, even though Rader is now incarcerated for life. His ability to lead such a seemingly ordinary life, holding down a job, raising a family, and maintaining a role in his church, while secretly being a murderer, has caused many to reflect on how much darkness can exist within the most unexpected individuals. Rader's actions also raise significant questions about the limitations and evolution of criminal investigations. His case is often cited as an example of how difficult it can be to solve serial murder cases, particularly when the killer is methodical, patient, and leaves few clues behind. The BTK killer's taunting letters were a key part of the investigation, and while they were crucial in keeping the case in the public eye, they also complicated the investigation by leading investigators to chase false leads. Forensic evidence was scarce, and the lack of immediate DNA or physical evidence from the crime scenes meant that the police had few avenues to pursue early on. Rader's ability to disappear from the radar after his last known murder in 1991 was a testament to how meticulously he covered his tracks. It wasn't until 2004, when he sent the floppy disk that would eventually lead to his capture, that law enforcement had the breakthrough they needed. The use of digital forensics in solving the BTK case was groundbreaking. Before Rader's mistake in sending the disk, investigators had been struggling to gather any substantial evidence. The fact that the floppy disk contained metadata that linked back to Rader's personal computer was a pivotal moment in modern criminal investigations. This case helped set the stage for the future use of technology, including DNA databases, digital evidence, and genetic genealogy, which have since been instrumental in solving numerous cold cases. While Rader's case remains one of the most infamous, it also helped improve law enforcement techniques that have led to the capture of other serial killers in recent years. Rader's personality also offers valuable insight into the mind of a serial killer, particularly one who operates in a methodical and cold-blooded manner. His lack of emotion during his trial and his chilling recounting of the murders suggest a deep detachment from the human suffering he caused. Psychologists and criminologists have studied Rader's behavior extensively, often describing him as a textbook example of a narcissistic and sociopathic individual. His need for control, his sadistic tendencies, and his ability to compartmentalize his family life from his killing spree are traits commonly associated with serial killers, particularly those who live among their victims and avoid detection for extended periods. In interviews, Rader often displayed an alarming sense of pride in his actions, further emphasizing the lack of remorse that is so characteristic of many serial killers. The public fascination with serial killers, and with Rader in particular, has also led to a broader conversation about crime and justice. Rader's case sparked debates on the role of media in covering criminal cases and the ethical implications of glorifying killers. While Rader sought attention and notoriety through his letters and public taunts, his case also raised concerns about the potential for individuals to achieve fame through criminal acts. Many documentaries, books, and podcasts have been created around the BTK killer story, some of which offer insight into the psychology behind his crimes, while others focus on the fear and trauma he inflicted on his community. For the families of his victims, however, the public interest in the case has not always been welcome. In the years following Rader's arrest, many of the victims' relatives have spoken out about the emotional toll that his crimes have taken on their lives. Some have expressed anger at how their loved ones' deaths became part of a public spectacle. Others have shared their ongoing struggles with grief, trauma, and the difficulty of finding closure. While Rader's conviction brought some justice, the psychological scars left by his killings are far from healed. For many of the surviving relatives, their loved ones are not just victims of a serial killer. They are individuals with unique lives, hopes, and dreams that were violently cut short by a man who seemed to have no regard for their humanity. Rader's children, too, have faced their own burdens. The horror of learning that their father was the notorious BTK killer is something they will likely carry with them for the rest of their lives. In interviews, Rader's daughter has spoken about the sense of betrayal she felt upon discovering her father's identity. For her, as well as for the children of the other victims, the emotional and psychological repercussions of the crimes are long-lasting. It's a cruel irony that Rader's family, who were not physically harmed by his actions, were still profoundly affected by the revelation of his dark secret. In recent years, the city of Wichita has sought to heal from the fear and trauma that Rader instilled in the community. While the BTK killer's capture brought a sense of relief, the decades of uncertainty left their mark. Some residents continue to feel a sense of unease when reflecting on the period when they lived in constant fear of the killer's next move. Yet, the city has also attempted to move forward. Memorials for the victims have been established, and there are ongoing efforts to honor their lives and ensure that their stories are not overshadowed by the legacy of their killer. As Rader grows older in prison, his case continues to be a subject of study for those interested in criminal psychology and law enforcement. Rader himself, now in his late 70s, remains incarcerated and has expressed no remorse for his actions. In recent interviews, he has shown little emotional response when discussing his crimes, and some psychologists have speculated that his lack of empathy may be indicative of his deep-seated narcissism and sociopathy. Rader's continued detachment from the gravity of his actions serves as a stark reminder of the chilling nature of his personality, someone capable of committing horrific murders without ever truly confronting the emotional consequences of his actions. Dennis Rader's case remains a haunting example of how a serial killer can live among society, undetected for years, while carrying out brutal crimes. It underscores the terrifying reality that those who commit such atrocities often do so with a cold and methodical approach, hiding their true nature behind a facade of normalcy. His case serves as a dark reflection on the human capacity for evil, as well as the lengths to which individuals can go to conceal their darkest desires. While Rader may never be free again, the psychological, emotional, and societal impact of his actions will continue to reverberate for years to come. As time passes and Dennis Rader's life sentence continues, the long-term effects of his crimes are still being felt by the families of his victims, law enforcement, and the broader public. The BTK case remains one of the most notorious in criminal history, primarily due to the way Rader led a seemingly normal life while secretly committing acts of unimaginable violence. The case has influenced criminal investigations, shaped public perception of serial killers, and been the focus of much academic and psychological study. However, even as the years go by, the trauma for those who were personally impacted by Rader's actions endures. For the victims' families, the knowledge that Rader has never shown genuine remorse for his actions continues to be an emotional burden. Although some relatives of the victims have been able to find some closure through his conviction, there is no denying that the emotional scars of their loved ones' deaths are lasting. Survivors and family members of Rader's victims have expressed the challenge of reconciling their memories of their loved ones with the horrific manner in which they were taken from them. The emotional toll continues to ripple through generations as the legacy of pain and loss lingers. Wichita, Kansas, too, remains marked by Rader's crimes, and the memories of living under the constant fear of the BTK killer still shape the city's history. The people of Wichita, particularly those who were alive during the years when the killer was active, often speak of the eerie atmosphere that blanketed the community during the 1970s and 1980s. Many residents recall the heightened sense of paranoia and vulnerability they felt as Rader's crimes escalated. When his identity was finally revealed, there was relief, but also horror. Relief because the terror had ended, but horror because the killer had been a member of their own community, someone who had been able to live undetected among them for so long. The BTK case has had a significant impact on how serial murder investigations are conducted today. The technological advancements that played a key role in Rader's capture, such as digital forensics and the use of data from digital devices, have become crucial tools in solving cold cases. The digital footprint left behind by criminals is now a central part of many investigations, and Rader's case showed how even a small mistake, like sending a floppy disk, could lead to the unraveling of a carefully constructed facade. Law enforcement agencies have since embraced new methods and technologies to crack down on serial killers, and Rader's case has been cited as a case study in this regard. The lessons learned from his capture have not only contributed to the field of criminal investigation, but have also helped resolve other cold cases that might have otherwise remained unsolved. Rader's case also continues to fuel a broader fascination with serial killers in popular culture. Documentaries, books, podcasts, and television specials have all explored his crimes and the chilling psychology behind them. Many of these works have sought to understand the mind of Dennis Rader, analyzing his narcissism, need for control, and lack of remorse. His methodical approach to killing, his ability to compartmentalize his life and separate his family from his criminal activities, and his calculated manipulations have made him a subject of interest in the field of criminology. Experts have debated whether Rader fits the profile of a classic serial killer or whether his case represents a new breed of criminal, one that blends into society so seamlessly that they are able to evade detection for decades. Some criminal psychologists have argued that Rader's behavior reflects a type of sadistic pleasure derived from the power and control he had over his victims. His obsessive need for recognition and the satisfaction he gained from taunting law enforcement also point to his narcissism. His letters to the media were not just a way of drawing attention to his crimes, but a means of maintaining control over the investigation. Rader was not just seeking fame. He wanted to see how far he could push the authorities and enjoy the agony of the search as it dragged on. The fact that he could stop for years and then start again, without remorse, is a testament to his psychopathy. Psychologists also continue to analyze Rader's relationship with his family, especially in light of the fact that he had managed to compartmentalize his violent tendencies and lead a seemingly normal family life. For many serial killers, family life is often an illusion. Many are either estranged from their families or have damaged relationships. Rader, however, was able to maintain a home, a career, and a place in the church community while secretly living as a murderer. This duality has been a focus of discussion among experts who have explored the way Rader's family was unwittingly part of his double life. His children, particularly his daughter, have spoken about the profound sense of betrayal and confusion they felt upon learning the truth about their father. In many ways, Rader's family became victims too, caught up in a web of lies and a twisted public persona he had carefully curated. Despite the ongoing public and academic interest in Rader's crimes, his case has also sparked important conversations about the ethics of profiling and sensationalizing criminals. While many argue that understanding the minds of serial killers is crucial to preventing future tragedies, there is also concern that such coverage can inadvertently glorify the killers. Some argue that the media's focus on Rader's personality and actions may unintentionally serve to elevate his status, granting him the fame and notoriety he craved. While the aim is often to understand what makes a person like Rader tick, it's a delicate balance, as many survivors and victims' families do not want their loved ones' stories overshadowed by the infamy of the killer. Rader himself, in his interviews and letters from prison, continues to exhibit the same characteristics that made him so dangerous. He is still capable of manipulating others and, in some cases, has shown a desire to continue to control the narrative surrounding his crimes. While incarcerated, he has attempted to maintain the persona of someone who is not entirely remorseful, but, instead, someone who seeks acknowledgement for his actions. His lack of empathy and his apparent indifference to the damage he caused further reinforces his status as a chilling example of a remorseless, narcissistic killer. As Dennis Rader grows older and remains imprisoned, his legacy will continue to influence criminal psychology and law enforcement, and his case will remain a subject of academic interest. His capture in 2005, after more than 3 decades of evading justice, serves as a reminder of how even the most meticulous and calculating killers can be brought to justice. However, his story also highlights the deep scars left by serial murder, scars that continue to affect his victims' families, his community, and society at large. While Rader's capture brought an end to the BTK reign of terror, it did not erase the years of pain he caused. His case serves as a haunting example of the darkness that can hide behind a facade of normalcy and a reminder that even the most ordinary-seeming individuals can harbor unspeakable secrets. For many, the BTK killer's story will remain a chilling lesson in the complexities of criminal behavior and the dangers of underestimating the capacity for evil that can lurk in the most unexpected places. As Dennis Rader's life in prison continues, his legacy as the BTK killer remains a stark reminder of the devastating impact one person can have on an entire community. The effects of his crimes extend beyond the families of his victims and the residents of Wichita. They resonate throughout society, raising complex questions about justice, evil, and the long-lasting scars left by such horrific acts. The ongoing psychological effects of Rader's crimes on the families of his victims are profound and enduring. For the Otero family, the first victims in 1974, the impact of Rader's brutal murders is a deep and lingering pain. Joseph, Julie, and their 2 children were killed in their home, and the grief that followed has never fully subsided. For the surviving family members, particularly those who lost loved ones in the Otero family, the years of uncertainty and fear, followed by Rader's eventual confession, have left indelible emotional scars. While they have worked to heal, the memory of the horror they endured has stayed with them. The emotional trauma is compounded by the knowledge that Rader could have been caught much earlier if not for the delays in the investigation. For other victims, like the family of Shirley Vian, whose murder occurred in 1986, and the family of Nancy Fox, murdered in 1977, the anguish and heartbreak are no less severe. These families had to live through years of terror, unable to grasp the true identity of the person who had destroyed their loved ones. The emotional toll of Rader's reign of terror has been compounded by the years of anguish spent not knowing who was responsible. Even though justice was ultimately served, the families must live with the haunting memories of what was lost. For the community of Wichita, the trauma is far-reaching. Wichita was a city defined by the fear that gripped it for over 3 decades. People were forced to change their routines, lock their doors more frequently, and live in constant anxiety. The killer's proximity to them, the fact that he was a member of their own community, made the fear all the more intense. The city lived in the shadow of the BTK killer, with residents unsure of where or when the next crime might occur. His capture was a relief, but it also served as a painful reminder that someone who appeared completely ordinary could harbor such darkness. The psychological implications of Rader's case extend to law enforcement as well. The BTK case highlighted both the strengths and weaknesses of criminal investigations in the pre-digital era. Despite the considerable resources devoted to finding him, Rader's ability to evade capture for so long, even while leaving taunting letters and other clues, revealed the limitations of traditional investigative methods. His case is studied as an example of how difficult it can be to track serial killers when they are methodical and patient, operating in a way that leaves few concrete physical clues behind. Investigators' initial failures to connect the dots, along with the police's eventual breakthrough with a floppy disk, underscores the evolution of criminal investigation in the modern era. Rader's eventual capture has also contributed to the refinement of criminal profiling. Psychologists and criminal behavior experts have studied his methods and the way he evaded capture, seeking to understand his personality and motivations. Rader's case has become a model for understanding the behavior of sociopathic serial killers, particularly those who maintain a dual identity, leading a normal life while committing horrific acts in secret. His complete lack of empathy, his desire for control, and his cold calculation in planning and executing his murders are features that have been studied extensively in criminology. Rader was able to compartmentalize his life and manage the facade of a family man, churchgoer, and community member, all while indulging in his dark, sadistic desires. As a result, law enforcement agencies now place more emphasis on the psychological and behavioral patterns of serial killers. The BTK case also highlighted the importance of building a broader profile of suspects, even when a lack of physical evidence or direct leads may make the case difficult. The careful, methodical planning involved in Rader's killings and his ability to lay low for years is something that is closely analyzed when tracking other serial offenders. Rader's case has also had a lasting effect on the public's view of serial killers. While these criminals have always fascinated the public, Rader's case contributed to a broader understanding of how such killers function in society. The idea that someone like him, someone who could appear so unassuming, even ordinary, could be capable of such brutality, shattered the common image of serial killers as outliers or societal misfits. His case challenged the notion that serial killers are always easy to spot and exposed the disturbing truth that people can commit monstrous acts while hiding in plain sight. This realization has made many more aware of the dangers posed by such individuals, as well as the psychological mechanisms that allow them to compartmentalize their behavior and blend into society. Rader's case also raised questions about the ethics of criminal investigations and media coverage. On one hand, his capture was a triumph of justice, a moment where the relentless pursuit of a criminal was finally rewarded. On the other hand, his public confessions and the media frenzy that followed have led to discussions about whether serial killers should be given the platform to glorify their crimes. Rader, for example, reveled in the attention he received during his trial and from his letters, and many have questioned whether such criminals should be allowed to take center stage in the public consciousness. Some victims' families and advocates believe that too much attention is given to the killers themselves, often at the expense of the victims' stories. Despite his incarceration, Rader's need for recognition and attention continues. His prison letters, interviews, and occasional comments about his crimes suggest that he still derives some satisfaction from the notoriety he gained during his years as the BTK killer. Rader's cold detachment, even in the face of his convictions, reinforces his narcissism. He continues to show little remorse, further underscoring the chilling nature of his psyche. His ongoing refusal to accept responsibility for the pain he caused only adds to the horror of his crimes. Looking forward, the BTK killer case continues to shape the way law enforcement, psychologists, and society view serial killers. Rader's story is both a cautionary tale and a lesson in criminal investigation. The use of advanced forensic methods, digital forensics, and psychological profiling has improved as a result of Rader's capture and the subsequent studies of his behavior and tactics. The case also illustrates the dangers of underestimating the potential for evil that can hide behind an ordinary, everyday life. While Dennis Rader will likely spend the remainder of his life in prison, the fear and trauma his crimes inflicted on his victims and their families will never fully fade. The people of Wichita and those affected by his actions will forever remember the terror that gripped their community for over 3 decades. Rader's legacy serves as a dark reminder of the capacity for evil within some individuals and the vigilance required to identify and stop such criminals before they can cause even more harm. In the end, the BTK killer's case is not just one of criminal justice, but also of the complexities of human behavior, the consequences of unchecked evil, and the importance of resilience in the face of unimaginable horror. Even though Dennis Rader has been caught and convicted, his story will remain a powerful and haunting lesson for future generations. As time moves forward, the BTK killer case continues to serve as a chilling testament to the depths of human depravity and the ability of one man to instill terror and sorrow across a community. Despite Dennis Rader's conviction and the years that have passed since his capture, the ramifications of his crimes remain far-reaching. They continue to influence not only criminal investigations and law enforcement practices, but also shape societal understandings of serial murder and the complexities of human behavior. In Wichita, where Rader's reign of terror began, a sense of uneasy peace has slowly returned. Though the fear of the BTK killer's return once loomed large, the city has worked hard to rebuild its sense of normalcy. Memorials have been established to honor the victims, ensuring their stories are remembered beyond the tragic circumstances of their deaths. The families of the victims continue to find strength in one another, as well as in the support of the wider community. Yet, the scars left by Rader's crimes are permanent. For some survivors, the act of remembering is both healing and painful, a delicate balancing act between honoring loved ones and confronting the lasting impact of Rader's twisted actions. In many ways, the BTK case has catalyzed a broader shift in how serial killings are studied and understood. As technology advanced and criminal psychology evolved, Rader's case became a cornerstone in understanding the methods and mindsets of serial killers. His ability to conceal his identity for so long, while maintaining a facade of normalcy, has made him a case study for criminologists. His manipulation of his public image as a family man, church leader, and community member has been dissected by experts seeking to understand the psychology behind this kind of behavior. The notion that serial killers can be anyone, anywhere, has become more prevalent in criminology. Rader's case exemplifies the idea that such killers often operate in plain sight, blending seamlessly into their communities while hiding their darkest urges. His ability to evade detection for so long, while taunting law enforcement with cryptic letters and maintaining a public persona, has added a layer of complexity to our understanding of how killers like him operate. While many serial killers are solitary figures, Rader was able to hide his crimes for decades, making him one of the most notorious serial killers in modern history. In his case, the killer's proximity to his victims, literally living among them, only heightened the sense of violation and fear. As law enforcement continues to improve its investigative techniques, the BTK killer case remains a powerful reminder of how much has changed in the tools available to detectives. Rader's capture in 2005 was partly thanks to advances in digital forensics, which was a major turning point in criminal investigations. The metadata from the floppy disk he sent to the media proved to be the breakthrough investigators needed to pinpoint him. This case helped demonstrate the power of digital evidence and pave the way for new methods of solving crimes, from genetic genealogy to expanded databases that allow for faster identification of suspects in cold cases. Today, investigators are far more prepared to tackle serial crimes, leveraging technology to unearth clues that may have once gone unnoticed. In a broader sense, Rader's crimes also reflect a deeper societal issue: the ability of some individuals to compartmentalize their lives and suppress their darker impulses. Rader's chilling ability to lead a double life, participating in his community and church while committing horrific murders, demonstrates the complexity of human behavior. His case is a disturbing example of how people can wear masks of normalcy while harboring deeply sinister intentions. This realization has sparked important conversations about the nature of evil and how to identify it before it leads to tragedy. Yet, despite all the psychological insights gained from studying Rader's case, one question remains hauntingly unanswered: how did he go unnoticed for so long? What allowed him to slip through the cracks of law enforcement and society for over 30 years? The answer, perhaps, lies in the combination of his cold calculation, his patience, and the very nature of his crimes. His deliberate approach to killing, waiting years between murders, controlling the investigation through his letters, enabled him to fly under the radar for decades. The complexity of his personality, coupled with the limitations of forensic science at the time, allowed him to escape capture for so long. For Rader, the legal repercussions of his actions are now set. He will never walk free again, spending the remainder of his life behind bars without the possibility of parole. In prison, Rader has been largely solitary, continuing to write letters and express his views, though his influence has waned. His status as a notorious killer remains, but the public's attention to his case is dimmed with time. For him, the notoriety he once sought may now feel distant, replaced with the quiet monotony of prison life. But for those who were affected by his crimes, whether it be the victims' families, the residents of Wichita, or the law enforcement officers who worked tirelessly to capture him, the story is far from over. It's a story of loss, fear, and a long, painful journey toward healing. Many of the families of Rader's victims still speak out, continuing to advocate for justice and remembrance, ensuring that their loved ones are never forgotten. The legacy of the BTK killer is not just one of horror, but also one of resilience. The families of the murdered, despite the horror and grief that still haunt them, continue to share their stories, offering a voice for those who can no longer speak for themselves. Dennis Rader's case is not merely an isolated event, but a reflection of the broader challenges society faces in identifying and stopping serial killers. His case stands as a chilling reminder of the dangers of complacency, of the ways in which a killer can hide in plain sight, and of the lasting impact such crimes have on both victims and communities. As criminal investigations evolve and new methods of identifying offenders emerge, Rader's case continues to serve as a somber touchstone in the ongoing fight against serial murder. Though he is behind bars, the reverberations of his actions continue to affect countless lives. As Dennis Rader remains incarcerated, the ripple effects of his crimes continue to reverberate, influencing not just law enforcement practices and the study of criminal psychology, but also ongoing discussions about justice, accountability, and the lasting trauma inflicted by serial killers. Though the BTK killer's reign of terror ended when Rader was captured in 2005, the impact of his actions continues to shape the narrative surrounding criminal justice and the pursuit of justice for victims. For the families of Rader's victims, the journey toward healing is ongoing. While his capture brought an end to the public fear that had gripped Wichita for so many years, the emotional toll on the victims' families is not abated. Survivors must navigate a complex emotional landscape: grief, anger, betrayal, and the need for justice, all while grappling with the unsettling reality that someone they may have known and trusted could be capable of such heinous acts. The Otero family, in particular, has worked through decades of grief since the murders of Joseph, Julie, and their children in 1974, and their ordeal underscores the enduring emotional burden carried by the families of Rader's victims. They continue to seek peace, often finding it through advocacy and sharing their stories, ensuring that their loved ones' lives and legacies are never overshadowed by the man who took them. Rader's capture also brought relief to the residents of Wichita, who had lived in fear for over 3 decades. While the fear of the BTK killer's return was finally extinguished with his arrest, the emotional scars left by his actions linger in the community. The knowledge that such a dangerous individual had lived among them for so long, participating in everyday life while harboring such dark impulses, has deeply altered how people view their neighbors and their sense of safety. For some, This realization has prompted a broader discussion about trust and the ability of individuals to conceal their true selves behind social facades. The case has raised uncomfortable questions about how effectively society can truly protect itself from the kind of predators who blend into everyday life. The role of the media in Rader's case has been a source of both praise and criticism. On one hand, the extensive media coverage of the BTK killer's crimes and his taunting letters to the press played a critical role in keeping the public alert and aiding law enforcement in piecing together his identity. On the other hand, the media's fascination with Rader and his manipulative behavior has raised ethical concerns. Many argue that by giving Rader the platform he craved, the media inadvertently fed into his need for recognition and control. In the years following his capture, questions have emerged about how much attention should be given to serial killers and their exploits. While public awareness of such cases is vital for criminal investigations and ensuring that victims' stories are heard, the balance between informing the public and giving criminals the attention they seek remains a topic of ongoing debate. Rader's case has also had a lasting impact on the field of criminology and how serial killers are studied. His ability to evade capture for so long while maintaining a normal life challenges many of the traditional models of criminal behavior. Rader's case demonstrates that some serial killers do not fit the stereotype of the socially isolated, disturbed individual. Instead, they can be outwardly integrated into society, even holding respected positions within their communities. His actions challenge criminologists to rethink the psychology behind serial killing and to consider how many killers may be living undetected among us. As a result, criminal profiling and behavioral analysis have evolved, with a focus on identifying the more subtle traits of serial offenders, traits that may not be immediately obvious but can be critical in stopping them before they strike again. Technological advancements in criminal investigations have also been spurred by Rader's case. Rader's use of a floppy disk to communicate with the media, which ultimately led to his capture, highlighted the growing importance of digital forensics in solving crimes. In the years since, law enforcement agencies have developed more advanced tools to trace digital footprints, and many unsolved cold cases have been cracked using similar techniques. In some ways, the BTK killer was caught at the crossroads of an older era of policing, based on physical evidence and human analysis, and a newer digital age in which forensic technology and cyber tracking play an increasingly central role. His capture set a precedent for how digital evidence could help solve even the most complex of cases, and it continues to shape the evolution of criminal investigations today. The influence of the BTK killer case extends beyond criminology and law enforcement. The case has become a fixture in popular culture, with numerous documentaries, books, and podcasts exploring Rader's crimes and his psychological profile. The public's fascination with serial killers remains strong, as these cases offer insights into the dark recesses of human behavior and challenge society's understanding of morality and evil. However, this fascination also raises important ethical questions about the fine line between understanding a criminal's psyche and inadvertently glorifying their actions. Rader, like many notorious criminals, thrives on the notoriety he gained from his crimes, and this raises concerns about whether such coverage risks feeding the very narcissism that drives these killers. For survivors and families of victims, the continuing media coverage of Rader's case can be a source of distress, as it can reopen old wounds and reignite the pain of losing loved ones to such brutal violence. Many feel that the killer's story should not be allowed to overshadow the memories of the victims, whose lives were cut short by a man who sought to control and dominate others through his violent acts. As these discussions continue, advocates for the victims stress the importance of honoring the lives of those who were taken by serial killers, ensuring that their stories are told with dignity and respect. Despite the passage of time, the legacy of Dennis Rader's actions will continue to affect the families of his victims, the community of Wichita, and the broader field of criminal justice. Rader's capture was a significant victory for law enforcement, but it does not erase the pain and loss caused by his crimes. For those who lived through the fear, who lost loved ones, or who investigated his crimes, the scars will never fade completely. However, the lessons learned from Rader's case about criminal behavior, investigative techniques, and the vulnerabilities of society will continue to resonate for generations to come. In the end, the BTK killer's story is not just about the man who committed these atrocities. It's also about the profound impact his actions had on the people around him, the city he terrorized, and the world that watched as he evaded justice for so long. His case is a haunting reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind seemingly ordinary lives, and it forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about evil, humanity, and the potential for violence in unexpected places. As society continues to grapple with the aftermath of his crimes, the legacy of the BTK killer remains a cautionary tale, urging vigilance and compassion as we strive to protect the most vulnerable among us.